Good morning and happy Tuesday 10 at 10. I am your host, Richard Charpentier, and we're here to answer questions for you, the listeners and the bakers. And today we have no questions that came through. So I'll take this time and opportunity to talk about the importance of shelf life and shelf life extension because this is a question that comes often. So, as you're thinking of extending the shelf life of your product, whether it is a bread, whether it is a cookie, whether a cupcake, a muffin, a puff pastry, a croissant, anything you do with flour, there are certain things we need to understand. Everybody goes through shelf life extension as a very easy approach, thinking, okay, we just need to add one thing in and walk away, and I'm getting 5, 6, 7 days. So I wanted to take those few minutes to explain the importance of shelf life and how to do it properly. So first and foremost, it's always important. We'll take an example of a cupcake. A manufacturer has a cupcake filled with a cream filling, and they have a 5 day shelf life. So how do you go over that? Let's say you're trying to get double it, get 10 days. How do you go through it? So it's always good to understand the first thing is what happens to your product after 5 days. Does the cream get liquid? Does the cake get soft? Does the smell changes? Do you get mold? What are the issues of why your shelf life is only 5 days? And that's what when I work with customers, I always ask them, what are your main issues that you're trying to correct? Shelf life is determined by the baker, and it's all about keeping the and preserving the quality, freshness of the product within those 5 days. So the first thing to do is, okay, what do I need to do to get there? Often you will have to change the formulation slightly. You can't just change the product and keep everything the same. So the first thing that I do is try to understand what ingredients do you use within your cupcake with the cream filling. So you're using fresh eggs for your cream, you're using milk for your cream, and your cupcake is just a basic recipe, and you have really not much into it other than a cupcake and a cream filling. So at this point, I will need to understand several things. Water activity, meaning the bound water within the cream and within the cake. It's always good that they together match, meaning they have to have a similar number because as the numbers will change, and we're talking in point. Let's say if your water activity of your cream is zero point 0.9 and your cupcake is 0.85, so therefore the water from the cream will go to the cake, making your cake soft and tacky over time. So now you need to regulate it, meaning you need to make sure they're all at zero point 0.5 or zero point 0.9, and you pick. It's better the lower as you extend your shelf life. So let's say 0.85. So now, how do you do it from your cream and you lowering from zero point 0.9 to 0.85? It's by changing the ingredients. So a lot of people will use some polydextrose, some people will use some glycerin, some people will use more sugar and different types of sugar to basically lower your water activity, or even use different milk sources and different ingredients to basically lower that before it's injected. That would be the first thing. The second thing would be to understand how do I preserve mold? Now I'm going to go from 5 days to 10 days. Do I need to be worried about mold? Yes. And where does it start? The mold starts in your bakery. Because as your products are coming out, you guys are doing all the hard work to get a product made properly and coming out of the oven. But as soon as it comes out of the oven, it's basically you create a kill step. There's nothing growing in the product. But as soon as it's in your bakery cooling down, that's where the issues will happen. That's where the molds are coming from the bakers and the bakeries. Now, I'm not saying the bakeries are dirty, but molds and yeast and everything that are around us, that's why they say wash your hands, do what you have to do. So at this point, you would need to make sure that how your product is being cooled is very important. And what are the steps as you're filling your cake? You have to wait for a internal temperature to be a certain temperature before you can fill your cakes. And the cream temperature has to be not, there's a difference of temperature. You have to follow and respect very rigorous, temperatures and timeline as you do it. Then how do you handle it? Are people using gloves? How's your sanitation program? Do you have ventilation blowing air around your products? All of those details will contribute to the quality and the shelf life of your product. Now, you're filling your cakes. How do you fill your cakes? Do you use pastry bags? Are the pastry bags at the tips, are they clean? If it's an automated system, how often do you clean that system? And how often you make sure that the product is dried well, because sometimes when you clean, but if you have water remaining, let's say in the hopper and anything like that, you will have other issues because that excess water will go and end up in your product, will generate mold. And it's all about controlling moisture. So now you're filling that step, but also the pH, basically the pH is referring to the acidity or alkalinity of a product. For example, a lemon is about a pH of 3.5, 3 to 4. And baking soda is basically alkaline. So you have the acid and the alkaline, acid and base. So it's always best for product shelf life to be at a certain pH to allow for products that we add in, as we get a lot of questions, such as sorbic acid, sodium propionate, uh, and to be added to your products to act as more preservation. And none of those, will be good by themselves. Some are better for mold. Some are better for yeast strains because that's what's in the air. We're not talking about yeast going in your bread. And that's where, at that point, it's selecting the right, or sometimes a combination of several in your product at the right level based on what I said. What are the risks of you getting, well, as you're extending your shelf life, what are the risks? So those sort of things. And if your product is well done for 10 days, you should be good, because then later on, you're going to deal with the issues of staling. And staling is using basically the starch, which is what we're using. Flour has a lot of starch, and it retrogrades and it gets harder over time. And you can do it through formulation. You can do it through pH as well, and you can do it by adding different enzymes within your product to basically correct that. So overall, in the last step in shelf life, and when you try to do shelf life, is do you need to change your packaging? And our example of the clamshell, it would be, okay, now I have our muffin, our filled muffin, now you have a little clamshell. The clamshell is not enough to keep the product fresh. It dries off over time. So what I would do is say, okay, let's see if I can do a different packaging and seal it or vacuum seal it and modify the packaging. There's so many things you can do as you're talking about shelf life. And when we get a lot of questions tonight, that's why I wanted to take the time to talk to you to say, hey, it's not 1, 2, 3 and done. It takes some research. That's why R&D is very important. It takes some dedication. It takes understanding the science of baking and also the art of baking, how you make a cake, and balancing the art and science of baking together to achieve the good results. So I hope it was valuable for all of you. And it's a segment that, I know we get a lot of questions, and I'd love to be one-on-one with everyone and say, hey, tell me what you have. And if you're interested to do the one-on-one, you go to the BAKERpedia website on the bakery resources. They do offer a 1-hour consultation, and then we do a Zoom session, and we break down your products and where you need to do for the next step, as what's the cost of product being wasted or returned. So it's $250. It's money well invested. So I recommend it. And you have a fantastic rest of your day, and thank you for listening.